Yeah, I love that perspective. I think so much of the mindset I try to inhabit is talk less. The patient and or client wants to know what is going on with me and can you help? And so
Hmm.
essentially it's such a mindset of use less words. Can you
Right.
provide value? Yes or no? But but I love the way you flip that. That's such a great idea because it's so easy to go into, and this is where I think I naturally fall back into, hi, it's nice to meet you. Here's the value I can provide you.
Hmm. Yeah, me too.
What you make me think of is whether this is true or not. Um, this idea that Ben Franklin, when he was meeting people, would go, "Can I borrow a book from you?" He wouldn't say, "What can I
Mm.
do for you?" He wouldn't say any of that. He would say, "Hey, can I borrow this book that you have?" Because it's that psychology of when somebody has done you a favor, that forms a certain relationship and they are likely to help you out
Mm.
again in the future.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for, hi, I'm Joe. I know all this stuff. Instead of doing that, going and go, hi, man, I really like what you got going on here. This is
Hmm.
fascinating. What are you guys up to? Why do you
Yeah.
do it that way? Teach me what you're doing. I like that. That's
Yeah.
really the way my mind works. That's flipped on its head, but I like that.
Yeah, and I think it's always like that way from a marketing perspective. And I certainly like I would say that's still a bias that I would have. I don't think I do as much direct marketing as I used to. But like my first job, probably like 1 year in, I was the clinical supervisor. Like this is 1 year out of PT school for the facility I worked at, and right away I had to go into being the clinician that did every physical therapy evaluation, but I also had to be in charge of marketing for that clinic. And I didn't know what I was doing, right? Like I didn't really have any education from a marketing perspective, but what they wanted me to do was to go to different doctors' offices around the area and try to hand out cards. And like you could never talk to the doctor, right? The front desk people would treat you like you were, like a lower class citizen because you were coming in and like understandably they're busy, but you had no opportunity doing that to do anything but say, here's what I could do for you. You know what I mean? It was, um, and then, like as I learned a little bit more, I think the only way I was able to make relationships with some of those doctors was to say, can I come in and shadow? And, like just, and not say anything, right? Like basically just be able to be there for an hour and just watch them do their thing. And somehow, like sometimes that would be a much better relationship. Like there would be at least a chance that you would develop a relationship. And to this day, I still have some physicians that I have close relationships with from that first job, and they're the only ones were ones that I like basically offered to go in and just observe them and learn from them because it sort of like gets you into the door and you don't need to say anything, but it's like, all right, now a conversation may come about more organically. Now you have a better opportunity to say like why you're different. But it just like there was a lot of failure early on because you're just sort of thrown into the fire. And I think there was just a lot of wasted time going to different offices and, really quickly trying to talk to someone and hand out a card and like useless, right? So, but being able to say, okay, can I make an appointment and I'm just going to observe? Like, I want nothing from you, but can I just watch? And I think that was quite useful, being an entrepreneur. And I think when you get out of the physician game, right, like physicians, they're sort of like held at a higher standard. Their time is more valuable, especially if to a lowly physical therapist or chiropractor, right? But when you get into talking to, PT to a chiropractor, PT to someone who does acupuncture, to do massage therapists, to strength coaches, a lot of times it's a lot easier to have a conversation as long as the conversation is like, let's just go out and talk. Like, I bet you we have a lot of things in common, right? As opposed to here's what I could do for you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's good to meet you. Here I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Just like,
Yeah,
yeah, it
down to
seems like
earth.
we do a lot of the same things. But I'm still balancing out like how to best broach those subjects a lot of times. But like whenever there is an opportunity to be a patient or be a client, I tend to try to take that Sometimes you get priced out of that. With some of the DOs like in this area, there's a lot of like concierge physicians that I like, at least from what I'm listening to, what I'm hearing, like the idea of what they do. And I will try to offer my, oh, yeah, I'll be a patient. Let me go through that process. And like the first appointment is almost like $1,000. I'm like, I don't think I'm willing to put that into my budget right now. You know what I mean? And be that much. But like you do have to kind of price it all out. But whenever you can be a patient, a lot of times it's a way in the door. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. Do you find that works as well um, with similar business models? So, going into maybe not even specifically CrossFit, but a group fitness place.
Hmm.
Do you find there's a little bit of suspicion that happens, or like, what do you want to do, or weirdness and say, wait, okay, so you're not a coach, you're not our coach. You want to watch
Hmm.
what? Do you ever? Do you ever run into some of that difficulty?
I think sometimes if I try to force it, you know what I mean? If I go to say like a group fitness class or even like a yoga class, I've gone to like a couple yoga studios. Like I try to get a sense of like how big is the class. If it's like a really big class, I'm usually not going to like try to talk to the instructor specifically after that. But like if trying to find like smaller groups oftentimes works better. So like the conversation, getting to know the instructor happens a little bit more organically. And I feel like a lot of times like the smaller group also tends to fit with the mentality of what we're trying to do is like work with people closer as opposed to just like a volume oriented business where, as many people in the door as you can. So there's been times like in the past where I've taken some classes that are like more of a chain, and then I've tried to talk to the instructor after that. And they've had a conversation, but nothing came from it because I just think I don't know, like again, I was trying to come at it from a perspective of, this is what I can do for you as opposed to, like how could you teach me? But I think sometimes like there's nothing that there's not much you're going to get out of a course. Like if you're too divided, or a course or a class, like if you're too divided on your ideas of what you think is. So I think it's important to kind of like find that happy medium. Like small groups tend to work better for me. Having some type of common thread in your theory and understanding, I think tends to help too, as opposed to trying to just say, hey, you know, I'm a trainer, down the road. I also have this background as a therapist. Like, I think I definitely rested on, I'm also a therapist, as like that was my selling point. It was like, that's turned some people off actually, because it's like they just have this idea of what a therapist is, which is negative because they've had bad experiences in therapy. And I'm sure you get the same thing with chiropractics. So yeah, again, letting the conversation try to happen organically. Sometimes it's hard to do that when you get into a class where it's like, all right, this is just too busy. I'm going to take the class. Maybe I'll come back for a couple, right? If they start to get to recognize you because you've done several, right? Like trying to like, don't be too forceful with like introducing yourself until, like they see you there a little bit more often, or maybe somebody that has been in the class, more often that could be a good way to get the introduction. But I've made that mistake where nothing was negative, but it just nothing came out of it. I guess to be more direct there, like I think let's take a yoga scenario, right? Like you want to kind of make a relationship with a yoga studio, try to figure out like who owns the studio and try to do a one-on-one with that person, right? And and then after that follow up by taking their class, the one they're teaching specifically, take their classes. That's a good way, I think, to get a relationship pretty quickly. And then, if the time comes, you'd be like, yeah, I'll happily, you know, give you a couple sessions, just see what I do. But just seeing if you can do a one-on-one whenever with the person that runs the place, I think that could be quite useful. And then you can do the same thing in like a CrossFit setting would be, there's so many different niches within CrossFit. So like the guy who runs the CrossFit next to our, he's awesome, but he's like probably one of the best athletes in the area for CrossFit. Like he's a regional competitor several years in a row. Just like an all around good dude, but like at any point in time, like he's so much better at me every CrossFit skill that I could basically just, be like, I want you to teach me Olympic lifting. I want you to, from your perspective, I want you to teach me like, you know, how to be better at muscle ups and things like that, right? Like you could, and that's just, I'm just using that as an example because I know like he would be just this resource that would just have so much knowledge about that stuff specifically. So it would be easy to try to just like seek out, the person that's running the show and just try to get a solo. It wouldn't be like a solo CrossFit class. It would just be like help me work on this skill because I think I want to put this into my repertoire, my own training. The last thing that I like want to kind of get from your perspective of where you're at, and this is something I'm really interested in trying to get out there to like the broader audience. Like now that we're seeing more businesses that are getting out of network, like healthcare professionals that are getting out of network and also trying to like hybridize their process, right? Like you mentioned before, like you don't consider yourself a chiropractor anymore, but you still got the education. No one can take that away from you, right? So that makes you unique in a way though too, right? So even though most of what you're doing is strength work, no one can take the knowledge that you have from being a chiropractor and understanding pain, understanding anatomy and biomechanics the way you do, right? So there's a lot of people like that we know that are sort of moving into that space. And I don't think that the general public understands, one, the difference and how valuable that can be and how to go about seeking out a good movement professional or whether they're coming at it from a perspective of injury first or they're coming at it from a perspective of the goal is fitness, but I also want to be as safe as possible. So where do you feel like you stand apart from, like if you're getting into the strength and conditioning world, that's a broad game, right? Like there's really there's no bounty to get in, or there's no tariff at the border, if you will. Like it's just, anyone can get in just because they like to work out. So what, in your estimation, sets you apart, but also let's just talk more broadly. What if you were going to tell your family member that they needed to look for a good movement professional? What are some of the foundations that you would look for?
Man, I've thought about this a lot because this is such a tough question. And I think, it's not only because we've talked about this, I really do think the only or the most legit way to do this really is to find somebody who trusts somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That really, it's the best way to do it. Your friend, friends, family members, whoever's like, who's moving the best? Who
Mm-hmm.
got past the biggest obstacle? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. Well, how did you do that?
Yeah.
Really the best way to do it.
Yeah.
This is a really, now this is a very smart ass answer. I apologize. I'm opinionated and I'm stubborn, and it's just the way it goes. I think number one, rule number one, they can't take insurance. That's a real wild swing I'm taking, and I know
Oh.
it is, but it just, I don't think we're in a place anymore
Mm-hmm.
where a primary acute pain provider, right? So like not chronic pain, your primary pain provider, it can't be medicalized.
Mm-hmm.
It is speaking German and you need somebody who speaks Spanish. Like it's not, it's just incompatible.
Yeah.
Um, the ends that the medical system are trying to, I mean, like the like doctors, not the infrastructure, like people
Mm-hmm.
who actually have your best interest in mind. I think what those people are trying to do is fundamentally different than
Mm-hmm.
the way in which the non-medical strength and fitness professional is trying to build tissue resilience through progressive overload.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's one of the things I was going to mention is like if I think about this with my own family and they're not close enough to me to come in on a regular basis, like what would I look for? And oftentimes I will look for a therapist or a chiropractor that is out of network as a start. I would add a couple caveats to that it really depends on like what the condition is, right? So like post-surgically, I I want people to kind of use their insurance, like just because I want them to go somewhere where they can get in more frequently. But that doesn't mean that they have to do that only, right? So I think like when you're out of network now, or when you have like a cash-based practice, you could totally think about how you see people, how often you see people differently than the traditional model that you see in network, which is usually like 2 to 3 times a week or something along those lines, which you realize like how arbitrary that is and how based on what's covered that is, right? So when you take that out of the mix, you can say that, all right, like maybe I need to only see somebody once a month just to get, some advice, just to see if like what I'm doing is I'm on the right path. But that doesn't mean I can't use my insurance and get a different value, right? So I think there is some caveats where it's like you take the person who's at a network that can give you more time and isn't under those same constraints, but at the same time you can use your insurance just so you can get like more time with a professional, and especially like when you're post-surgical, sometimes that's really important to sort of be connected to the surgeon too, right? Like go to a place that they really know the surgical protocols well. But then when you get outside of that, or if you're having an issue that you may, it's like your parent that they need like a combination of conditioning and to work around pain. Yeah, that's the first thing I'm going to look for, is like that they are not constrained by the healthcare system. And I've tried both. You can see, especially with our profession, I can't speak to chiropractors when the difference in finances, but I'd imagine it's kind of similar. The issue with being in network is when you work for somebody else, you have a doctorate degree, like there's a real ceiling on how much money you could make when you're being paid by somebody else through the in-network model. And it's really easy to make more than that ceiling when you take yourself out of that. So if you have gained some confidence in your skills, it doesn't take more than sort of like half your schedule, half the time that you were doing working for someone else to actually break even, right? So I think it's quite a bit different than when we're talking about if the ongoing salary for a typical therapist was like, multiple six figures or something like that. Then it's, there's the quality of care for the higher level professionals there might be a little bit more competition there, but it's actually quite a bit easier to just take on like a model that looks like that of a massage therapist, that of a personal trainer, having the background and the schooling that you have, and because you get paid so little in a normal clinic, and you get paid little not because of the people that are working there and robbing you, it's just because the insurance company isn't going to give enough money to the business as a whole to justify a high enough salary, right? So as soon as you get outside of that, you realize that there's there's a lot more money to be made for what your education is, that I think more and more people are going that route because they're confident in their skills, and the clients are seeing that there's a difference there, right? So it's sort of like once the wool gets pulled over the eyes of like what's possible, or pulled away from the eyes of what's possible, then you start to get a sense of, okay, like this job never needed to be what it was, but the insurance company is dictating what we all think of as a chiropractor, what we all think of as a physical therapist.
Yeah, the other thing I might say to that question would be this. Don't expect a patient or a client to come in and have a degree in medical science or kinesiology, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is look at their website, look at their marketing materials. Do you feel like, there are a lot of threats and dangers and risks this person is going to protect you from? Or B, is this person going to build you up and make you more capable?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a binary. That's a little
Mm-hmm.
black and white, but like which statement is more true, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's A, head for the hills, like
Yeah.
run from that web page. I don't want to hear anything about bad posture. I
Right.
don't want to hear anything about poor movements. I don't want to hear anything about degeneration. I don't want to hear
Mm-hmm.
any of that stuff.
Right.
We all have a specific tool. Is this person Is their tool protecting you from the scary world, or is their tool building up your resilience?
Absolutely.
I think that's a good arrow.
Yeah, and I would to add to that, it's connecting to what we were talking about with social media. And you can kind of look at it as direct to client marketing. But the more information that you have out there, if I'm a professional and say my dad asked me for a recommendation of a physical therapist and he lives in Harrisburg, if I start to do a little bit of research around like therapists or trainers and movement professionals in that area, and I see somebody who's got a bunch of like really insightful conversations talking about things that I can follow and I agree with, like that's going to be a nice sort of like confidence builder for me to refer that person out without me ever meeting that person. Now, maybe I'll also then look to reach out, but that like their conversations are talking not to my dad at all, but they might be talking to me, who then wants to refer my dad. You know what I mean? So like you can kind of get a sense of that's your resume that you're putting out there, whether it's, like, a podcast that we would do, a conversation that we might be having, we put that out there, right? At some point, someone might look at that and say, like, what is this person who I may, I have a client for them in this moment. What do they stand for? What is it like? What's their thought process? So the more content you put out there, and it's not content that's supposed to be like edited specifically to an audience, but just like really putting like honest conversations out there about like what your thought process is, what your background is, like that starts to, I think, be really useful, especially for professionals that are looking to refer to other professionals, maybe, across the country. But if they can have like kind of look at some online stuff, like that's a nice resume for them.
Definitely. Definitely.